Is this Israel and Hamas's last chance for a ceasefire? Committees say Biden committed impeachable conduct, and the DNC takes place in Chicago. It was like a big cookout. Only instead of potato salad, everyone brought word salad. Then more on this week's America Uncovered news headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered, I'm Chris Chappell. Did you know YouTube has been secretly unsubscribing people from America Uncovered? This channel would be so much bigger if it wasn't shadow banned by YouTube. So do me a favor, and if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button. My goal is to get to 600 subscribers by the end of the year. And now, on with the show. Over 100 pounds of cocaine worth $1.6 million washed up on the beaches of Islamorada in the Florida Keys during Hurricane Debbie, according to authorities. And that's just the amount they found. Who knows how much more ended up in the hands of local, let's call them entrepreneurs. Hopefully there isn't much more left in the waters, because that can't be good for the marine life. Except, of course, for the manatees, who are now able to outswim motorboats when they're not too busy pitching business ideas to everyone. The Democratic National Convention was held in Chicago this week. Kamala Harris officially accepted the Democratic nomination for president after a long, hard-fought primary campaign against who cares about pesky technicalities like actually electing our elected officials? Oprah was there. Everyone loves Oprah. And the Democrats have a wonderful platform that repeatedly refers to President Biden as the candidate running for a second term, even in the very first chapter of the platform. Either the Harris campaign was such a rushed and slapdash operation that they didn't have time to cut and paste her name to the official party document, or it's a good thing Biden was pushed out because his dementia may have gone airborne. A few minor snafus aside, like mistaking who the actual candidate is, the DNC went off without a hitch. And every faction of the left was united on every issue, is what I would say if it weren't for thousands of anti-Israel protesters showing up and disrupting the delegate party the night before the convention began, and spending the entirety of the DNC calling for a ceasefire. But these were peaceful protesters with nuanced views. And surely I'm saying that because it's the truth and not another misdirection before leading into footage showing the opposite to be true, right? Roll the footage. Protesters broke through fencing erected outside the United Center where the DNC was being held and clashed with authorities who tried stopping them from getting closer to the politicians. Dozens wound up being arrested. And for anyone saying this is reminiscent of January 6th protesters that stormed the Capitol and Democrats are hypocrites for not denouncing this as harshly, don't be ridiculous, it's totally different. These protesters have different flags. Look at that LGBTQ flag. This is about love. A summer of love, you could call it. Maybe the idea of another summer of love is why several businesses in Chicago boarded up, expecting the protests to become violent. Almost as violent as it would get if someone were to wave one of those LGBTQ flags in Gaza. Because when you look at the world through a Marxist oppressed versus oppressor lens, you lose sight of the fact that the oppressed can also oppress. Here's your monthly reminder that Queers for Palestine is like overly trusting women for Ted Bundy. For a more in-depth look at these protests, here's a video from earlier this week. And what are the odds of a war-ending Israel-Hamas ceasefire happening? U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Israel has agreed to a proposal that would close gaps in ceasefire negotiations. He explains the next important statement is for Hamas to say yes, and then, in the coming days, for all the expert negotiators to get together to work on clear understandings on implementing the agreement. However, like when scuba diving, don't hold your breath. I know that wasn't my funniest analogy, but it's an important tip, so you're welcome. A day before Israel tentatively agreed to this proposal, Hamas rejected it, claiming Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was moving the goalposts and the U.S. proposal was in line with his demands. But even if Hamas did agree to this ceasefire proposal, and I don't mean to seem culturally insensitive here, terrorists aren't always the most trustworthy folks, all this would do is reset the situation to what it was pre-October 7th. Israel being constantly worried about Hamas throwing any peace agreement out the window faster than they'd throw someone waving one of those LGBTQ flags out the window. A new round of ceasefire talks have kicked off in Cairo, and so we'll see if Israel agrees to new terms and if Hamas is willing to keep the peace. Though relying on Hamas to keep the peace is like relying on Edward Scissorhands to pack your parachute. And personally, I wouldn't trust Hamas with parachutes, and especially not with paragliders. And after the break, what actually happened at the Democratic National Convention? Welcome back. Fun fact, Joe Biden is still president. It's easy to forget that since he's been pushed so far to the back burner after being ousted by his own party, and is currently a lamer duck than Howard the Duck. Biden went from being the main event of the DNC to the opener, where he took an hour to give a 10-minute speech on the first night because he was constantly interrupted by thunderous applause and positive chants. Yes, Democrats love Biden so much they even kept him in their platform. Biden gave a fiery speech saying it's up to America to defend democracy against Donald Trump, who he claims said this about the white supremacists at the 2017 Charlottesville Unite the Right rally.
When the president was asked what he thought had happened, Donald Trump said, and I quote, "There are very fine people on both sides. My God." That's what he said. That is what he said and what he meant.
And Kamala Harris's campaign made the same claim on X. You're really gonna make me cover this again, aren't you? I literally just covered this story this week and how that just isn't true. Trump literally condemned white supremacists in the same sentence. Apparently, reading Snopes isn't part of the Democratic platform. Biden also addressed the protesters outside.
Those protesters out in the street, they have a point. A lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides.
On both sides, Biden is saying he loves terrorists. You see how absurd that sounds? I'm glad right-leaning media wouldn't be hypocritical and claim that's actually what Biden said. Oh wait, I'm wrong. I'm tired of this earth, these people. But Biden has a point, saying they have a point. While it's true that many of these protesters are supporting terrorists, being blatantly anti-Semitic and resorting to violence, and Biden has unequivocally denounced the rise in anti-Semitism since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, many of these protesters are acting in a peaceful manner and simply want to see an end to Palestinian civilian deaths, civilians who are often just as much victims of Hamas. So I see where Biden is coming from, saying the protesters have a point while also supporting Israel. I guess what he's trying to say is there are very fine people on both sides. It wasn't all love for Biden this week, though. The House Oversight, Judiciary, and Ways and Means Committees, leading an impeachment inquiry against President Biden, say he committed impeachable conduct and defrauded the U.S. to enrich his family. Well, that seals it. I'm definitely not voting for Biden now. Though they announce this, it's unlikely the House will actually take any action to impeach the president, even if they do have a slight majority. I mean, what kind of petty, vindictive politicians would launch a doomed-from-the-start bid to oust a president just for the optics? When has that ever happened? Oh, yeah. So Democrats impeached a Republican president, and now Republicans are looking to impeach a Democratic president. The Department of Justice under Democrats indicted a former Republican president, so are we going to see one day the Department of Justice under Republicans look into arresting their political rivals? This type of escalation is toxic. If someone is corrupt or breaking the law, absolutely hold them responsible for their actions. But it's hard to take it seriously when it reeks of politics. Can we just focus on the issues instead of trying to make yourself look better by making your opponents seem worse? Let's return to a more civilized time when political rivals settled their disputes in a more becoming way, with duels. But refreshingly, occasionally, both sides do agree on when someone actually needs to go, like Democratic New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez, who was found guilty on all counts in his corruption trial last month, and Republican former Congressman George Santos, who pleaded guilty to federal identity theft and wire fraud charges this week. Though noted serial liar Santos would likely argue this is all the work of a racist patriarchy, and they only went after him because he's a black woman. Speaking of black women, Kamala Harris. According to a Media Research Center study on ABC, CBS, and NBC from July 21st to August 17th, coverage of Kamala Harris has been 84% positive, while coverage of Trump has been 89% negative. But I'm sure this candidate that was appointed and not voted for by citizens earned all this positive coverage. I mean, just look at all the tough questions Harris has taken during interviews and press conferences with journalists. That's surely a thing she's done by now, right? Right? This just goes to show that if you only watch right-leaning or left-leaning media, You're not getting the full story. Here's a perfect example. A woman fainted at a Trump rally, and Trump walked out from behind the bulletproof glass to check on her and give her a hug when she woke up. Mind you, this was just weeks after getting shot. Now, if you hate Trump and only watch CNN, you'd never see positive stories like this. And if you love Trump and only watch Fox News, you'd never be exposed to anything negative about him. And if you're indifferent about Trump and only watch Cartoon Network, I envy you. Meanwhile, if you only watch Fox News, you might only see Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz as a valor stealer who let Minnesota burn to the ground during the 2020 George Floyd riots, and not realize he's also a loving father to a neurodivergent son who's immensely proud of his father. This is how we in the US have become so divided. When you only watch from one angle, you don't get to see the whole story. You see your side as angels and the other side as demons. There are shades of gray. Nothing in politics is purely black and white. Well, except maybe Obama's parents. Great speech he gave at the DNC, by the way. And speaking of DNC speeches, in the main event, Harris had a chance to prove herself when accepting the presidential nomination at the DNC. And how'd she do? Well, she talked about her mom and dad, and highlighted the most important part of her nomination: she's not Donald Trump. To be clear, if Harris wins the election, she'll be the president not just of the people who voted for her, but of everybody. I hope her policies, whether the platform says her name or not, are a success, because her success would be America's success. And hey, if the economy continues to take a hit and businesses go under, we can always get plenty of new business ideas from those coked out manatees in Florida. Speaking of ideas that are too good to turn down, here's another video and more importantly, YouTube's all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-smelling algorithm know you'll enjoy. An America Uncovered wouldn't exist without your support. Click that orange button to support us on Patreon. All it takes is $1 an episode, and you can set a monthly limit. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.